Hello, good afternoon, everybody. My name is Peter Robbins from Dublin City University, and I'm thrilled to welcome you to this thought leader session with Professor Gina O'Connor. So now, 20 years ago, Gina O'Connor was already making impressive headway in a research area which is still a source of considerable research, debate, and discussion, and that is whether large established organizations can outsmart young entrepreneurial, agile startups. Gina has over 10,000 citations and over a distinguished career has garnered pretty much every honor the academic profession has to offer. I pleaded with ISPIM for the privilege of moderating this session, as Gina has been a hero of mine for many years. In 2007, I was working as GlaxoSmithKline's first ever global head of innovation excellence, a role about which I knew very little, except that the organization had very high expectations of it. And I came across Gina's book on radical innovation, which quickly became my professional Bible. And quoting it definitely made it sound like I knew what I was doing. And since then, Gina has added to her vast body of work with, among many other things, the great book Grabbing Lightning, and more recently, Beyond the Champion. So today, Gina is sharing insights around how organizations can emerge even stronger from the shutdown. So Gina, over to you.
Wow, thank you, Peter. That's quite the introduction. So, and thank you everybody for joining. I really look forward to the conversation that will follow this and to your thoughts in this very turbulent time. I hope you like the font for the title slide here. Obviously, you've probably already talked a lot about this among yourselves and in other sessions in the conference, but it all started apparently, with the coronavirus, which has created a number of obviously disruptions in our lives and fear, a lot of death, sickness, and social isolation. But they're also then following the roller coaster of an economy that we've had, with stock markets up and down and all around, affecting some parts of the society more than others, but certainly dramatic, unforeseen levels of unemployment. And more recently, bubbling social unrest. And it's not that these issues are new, but it's that I think, the frustration from everyone is really causing them to bubble. And so, these are pictures from the United States, but the protests have gone global, and it's not just what's going on in the United States. What's happening in Hong Kong and in other countries is just sort of a symptom, I think, of the provocation of social unrest coming up as a result of all of these pressures that we are facing in the last few months. And the frustration that we're observing and the mismatches in supplies and demands are almost unbearable. And the sadness, the inability to meet some of the needs that we are facing, the frustrations on the part of the medical community, below on the part of all of us who are all of a sudden working from home, or like in my case, trying to teach from home, or you who are parents trying to teach at home, which you never had to do before. Complete drop off in demand of goods and services in certain industries, airline, all the entertainment industries, for example. And then operating models being completely inadequate that is leading to waste and want. And so, the destroying of animals that has had to happen because of poor practices in meat processing plants. And at the same time, we're witnessing huge increases in numbers of people requiring help with food. So the ironies of these mismatches in our economy today are just breeding incredible frustration. And we're hearing all kinds of prescriptions. I mean, that's part of the reason that Ian, wanted to continue to hold this conference. We need to keep talking about this. What are the prescriptions for innovation? And we're hearing all kinds of things about what to be doing right now. It's all around agility and adaptation of business models and finding new ways to repurpose your assets. And then thinking about what, quote, the new normal is and how can we be purpose-driven. And understand Gary Hamel's going to be speaking later on. And so thinking about and envisioning what that revolution will look like coming out of this. So we're hearing a lot of these, things about the future, but also a lot about now. And so what I wanted to do is share with you my perspective on what I'm seeing in terms of the types of demands on innovators that are occurring in this situation that we're facing. And I see these three different demands occurring kind of simultaneously. And what I'd like to do in this session is help us sort those out. And in particular, I'm speaking to those of you who have been focused on the more strategic innovation, the things that are more in the high uncertainty, the sort of horizon 3, because I feel like we're very, very vulnerable in that space these days for a variety of reasons. So generally what we see is a need for huge amounts of creative problem solving for crisis management. We're seeing a lot around surviving the now, and that's where all the calls around agility and rapid experimentation are coming. And then it's preparing for the new future. So I don't want to call it the new normal. I want to call it the new future. And we have no idea what that's going to be yet. And I think that's my main message, that we are fundamentally questioning some of the deepest roots of our society right now. And so this is going to be more around sense making for a while. And so I want to just dig into some of these a little bit. So in terms of the crisis management, we've got two angles on this. We have a collective agenda, collective problems where no single person or company could solve the problem. And there we are just finding amazing stories of humanitarian effort, particularly in the scientific community around sharing of information for vaccines, all around the scientific developments. We find over here in the upper right-hand corner of my slide, companies as being General Motors repurposing their plants, sometimes at governmental requirements, to make ventilators. We see down here a network of companies on the lower right that have coordinated themselves to increase the stocks of protective equipment for healthcare workers. And over on the lower left-hand side, we see many individuals banding together in that same cause to do what we can to help. And so there is a very collective agenda. There's also inside our companies crisis management that's occurring. And that is all around how do we readjust ourselves so that we can all work from home. And those of us who can't work from home, how do we readjust so we can work in the lab or in the plant in a safe way? And it's just enormous problem solving that occurs. And what we're hearing is that in many cases, those of you who are involved in strategic innovation are being asked to contribute and to readjust yourself to help solve these problems. So can you help us with the work from home problems? What communications platforms do we need? What kinds of new production process tools and processes do we need? And so everybody is sort of angling onto that crisis management sort of thing. And what I want to caution us in that angle is to try to reserve some time and some energy, and in particular some quietness for yourselves as a strategic innovator in a company. You have a job to do, and while it's not as frantic and the outcomes will not be as clear and the goals and objectives are not as obvious right now, the mandate is there and it's necessary. And so you might offer one or two people, in particular technical support persons, to help on these crisis teams. But the issues are frequently better addressed within the function that's responsible for them. And we need to recognize, obviously, creative problem solving isn't unique to the innovation team. Everyone does creative problem solving every day. All right, the second thing, surviving the now. And so what we're experiencing, obviously, is everything that we have learned in terms of rapid experiments. But I want to call some of this frantic innovation. So let's try anything to see what sells. And, you know, there's just a lot of adjustments that people have, that organizations have made. But in terms of repurposing assets, so up here on the left is a snow gun that's being repurposed to throw out disinfectant into large areas. Obviously, the restaurant industry has repurposed a lot of their activities. There are these little gizmos that have made their way out into the community now that help us open doors without having to touch anything. So there's all these experiments to restart the cash flow and the modification of existing offerings right now. In particular, in my own organization at Babson College, you know, the head of exec ed said, I want 6 short programs up in 10 days. So that kind of gives us the sense, it's an example of sort of this franticness of how are people more willing to learn these days in our particular industry. But I imagine that many of you are experiencing the same. Something that appears to have some staying power in this area around surviving the now is a recognition of this, quote, low-touch economy. And this is just a slide with a lot of different examples of what those are. And what people are really trying to talk about is how much of this is going to stick with us after we get a vaccine, essentially. And I think when I'm talking about the new future, I'm talking post-vaccine. So this website and these people are getting a lot of play right now in their presentations, and they make a lot of sense. But it is about the current, what we're perceiving as new normal. And I think we have to be concerned about in the new future how much of this actually unfortunately disrupts or is unsustainable from a business model point of view. So in terms of preparing for the new future and sensing our way forward, like I said before, I see that we really kind of almost have to go back to our roots as far as thinking about individuals' psychological needs, the sociological dynamics among individuals. And I mean in the workplace, I mean in society, I mean in terms of thinking about consumers' wants and needs, and in terms of thinking about business-to-business relationships. So we are recognizing a whole lot of new technology enablers. We have learned a lot about how to use technology over the last several months and are continuing to do that. But this is going to take patience and a rethinking of an organization's purpose and ambitions, and which of these shifts are temporary and which are going to stick. And so it's that kind of sensing that I'm thinking that the strategic innovation people need to reserve their energies for. And it's not frantic activity. So any of you who are familiar with our work, we talk about strategic innovation as being made up of these 3 organizational competencies of discovery, conceptualizing opportunities, of incubating, and of accelerating or scaling. But what has occurred now is moving from a world of uncertainty to a world of ambiguity. So uncertainty means, you know, you kind of know what the possible range of outcomes are, but you have no idea of their likelihood, any one of them's likelihood of success. But in the world of ambiguity, you don't even know what the possible outcomes are. And if we start to make frenetic investments and putting a stake in the ground now, you have a risk of a lot of wasted time and a lot of wasted money. So that's why I'm saying we got to slow the pace from a strategic innovation point of view. The strategic innovation portfolio is typically what we recommend is it's got to be guided by these concepts of what are the possible futures, what are the domains of innovation intent that our company wants to put the stake in the ground in creating for the future. And that has been our guidepost. And that's where the portfolio of strategic innovation opportunities tends to gain its energy. And what we find over time is that the capacity of an organization to engage in strategic innovation will increase and sometimes shrink. And right now we're in a point where it's very, very constrained, obviously. And so what we were trying to call for is recognize it's constrained, Recognize that it's got to have fewer resources and a slower pace at the portfolio, but don't stamp it out. So in terms of innovating in turbulent times, with regard to strategic innovation, it's important to maintain it. It prepares the organization to reemerge into a new future. What if we didn't have this, And so what we have to think about are the long plays and the deeper needs. At the same time that parts of your organization are doing crisis management and surviving the now. So don't disassemble the innovation enterprise and the management structure that you've got. Hold on to what you've got. And you'll have to reevaluate the domains of innovation intent. Some of those futures have completely evaporated, and there are new opportunity spaces that are opening up. That will require you review the portfolio, and you'll find that some of those applications and opportunities you're working can be repurposed, and some have become quite urgent, and others need to be slowed down, obviously. But it's also interesting that the surviving the now is like a learning lab for the strategic innovation team. What are the organizational competencies that you're seeing in your company that we'd never really before recognized as unique competencies? And so how do we start to question and see what those could be as opportunities, even if the current business model we're using is maybe short-lived, right? And so there are a number of examples of those, and we can get into some of those in the discussion later on, but I just kind of want to get through this first so that we can open it up. But we are seeing a number of really kind of interesting competencies that companies may not have recognized as strengths in themselves. And then in terms of this sensing the future, not only are you taking inventory of new competencies in your organization, but in terms of your focus on time frame, it's not about 3 years out or 5 years out. It's about once we have a reasonably effective vaccine. When you're thinking about that, that's when the new future will begin to settle, I believe. And so the developments are unfolding so quickly now. It's most important to observe and think about the emergent human needs. What about the new business models that we're seeing are actually sustainable from a profitability standpoint? I know so many organizations are trying things that are not sustainable from a business model point of view, simply to cover costs and keep people employed. And so thinking about how we might evolve those so that they are creating value both for the market and for the organization. And so really what your job is to think about what is becoming clearer as we move through this time about how our organization can contribute to an improved future. And so I think that's it. I think I want to just kind of reiterate that it's these three sets of demands on innovators right now around crisis management, surviving the now, and preparing the new future. And it's sorting those out and deciding which part of that you're playing in and ensuring that all three needs of the company are being met right now is crucially important. So with that, Peter, let's maybe open it up and see if there are any points of discussion.
Oh yeah, let's open it up to the floor. I'm very interested in a few things in there, but one of the things about you mentioned referring to as frantic innovation and frenetic investments and this knee-jerk reaction, I suppose, to what's going on at the moment. But in another way, isn't that a nice opportunity to experiment and to do fast learning prototypes and to try a few new things?
It absolutely is. I mean, and obviously that's what's going on. And so there's just the 2 points that I wanted to make. In many cases, they're fast experiments, and their objective necessarily is not a sustainable business model. It's a let's survive now kind of a model. So the issue is, how do we learn and think about what pieces of that we take and create actual new value in a sustainable way? So that's one element of it. And then the other message that I'm trying to convey is that if everyone is busy doing all of that, no one in the company is thinking necessarily in this sort of deeper, quieter way. So both of those things need to happen, and I don't think the same people can necessarily be doing both of those things because of the difference in how your brain has to work, or how you spend your time in a day.
And so I was also interested in you talking about the innovation team maybe being called in like the Marvel superheroes or the Avengers to solve everything in the company, process innovation and technical things. You're suggesting to hold firm and maybe deploy one or two people, but don't give the entire resource over to solving someone else's problems.
To the best extent possible, that's right. Because I think the word innovation is getting used. It always gets used, basically to express anything that's new or different or challenging. But what we're really talking about is creative problem solving here, right? And that can be done. That should be being done everywhere in the company. And while people in other parts of the organization may need some technical help coming up with how you do it or what the solution is, I think is best held in the function where the problem is occurring, because they know the problem better, right? They know the issue well. They know their market. And so, again, it's just a matter of ensuring that you're covering all three of these bases that I've identified and not taking everyone off and repurposing everyone because we all feel in a crisis right now.
What somebody's come up with you're mentioned that Horizon 3, some of those far out ideas could evaporate because of changes to the environment. So someone is asking, do you think COVID will lead to more radical innovation or less radical innovation?
Well, I mean, in certain industries, it's going to be more radical innovation. I think in terms of processes around vaccine development, we're going to see some major breakthrough in terms of how rapidly this is occurring. And so, but if we're not careful, and if every company focuses only on the now, that there's a possibility that it could sort of dry up, if we're not careful. So that's why we need to reserve these people who are sort of thinking and observing and maintaining, even learning from, for example, the collective crisis management. There's a lot going on in terms of collaboration that has never happened before. So how do we step back and capture this and say, how can we create some sustainable business models out of some of these cues that we're seeing?
There's a question around the companies that have already built some innovation architecture in terms of teams that are handling strategic innovation. Do you think that will put them in good stead for these turbulent times, or will everything be questioned in the new future?
In terms of whether those teams can remain funded? Is that whether they will continue to drive value for the organization, or do you think everything will be questioned in this new future and resources might be diffused away from them? Well, I think that's what we're calling for. I think that right now what we're calling for is we recognize that some of those resources may have to be diverted a bit, but the temptation is going to be to cut them out completely. And I think it's a real danger for our companies to do that. Even if you just maintain half of the resources that you have, so that you're continuing, discovery activity is not expensive, and incubation does not need to be expensive. It needs to be clever in terms of how we're managing some of these experiments. But it's more these days about the discovery work of reading these cues and putting things together. And if we don't do that, the larger, more established organizations are going to be caught, I think, in trying to serve up old businesses and old product lines in a world that has dramatically new opportunities.
Gina, the industries that have been affected most dramatically, do you think some of the symptoms of their either decline or the signs of their potential acceleration were evident before COVID. I think some of the systemic fault lines that they had and some of the opportunities they had for digitization, like in the education sector, were there, and this has just been accelerated.
Absolutely. I mean, certainly in the education sector, because I know that sector. Certainly, for example, at the collegiate level, some of this has been accelerated in terms of our willingness to adopt those technologies and try to build them in. But what we're finding in the education sector and what we're really questioning, certainly in the primary and secondary education, younger kids, the sociological issues that arise and are very, very difficult to handle. And the questioning about what happens, that technology can solve all the a lot of problems associated with learning. We're finding that in many cases that's not true, even at the collegiate level, and that the need for human contact and human interaction is manifesting itself in a number of ways. So the new future is not going to be as extreme as we're experiencing now in the quote new normal on education. So that's where I'm suggesting that as we kind of take a step back and you start to look at all the dynamics that are occurring as a result of everybody trying to learn in a distance manner. There are a number of positive things, but there are also a number of creeping forward new problems that are surfacing as a result. So that's why I would say, universities or school systems that are assuming that this is going to be the way to do it and putting all their stakes in the ground on that extreme form are going to be, they're going to find themselves at a disadvantage in the new future.
Okay.
So it's a complicated answer to a great simple question.
Now, there's somebody here I think that wants to catch you out. You mentioned uncertainty versus ambiguity, and this person has drawn upon the learning plan, in inverted commas, some methodology in the past to assist with opportunity assessment. Mm-hmm. Do you think there are categories of ambiguity, that's interesting, that could act to give similar guidance? Have you come across that?
Well, yeah, so the learning plan is a tool that resulted from our research, and it talks about 4 dimensions or 4 categories of uncertainty. And so that's, I think, what the person is responding to. And technical and market and resource and organizational uncertainty. So in terms of ambiguity, are there different categories? Certainly all those categories will also, experience ambiguity. But I think maybe the question is, are there different categories or other categories? I guess I have to be honest and say I haven't really thought about it. It's quite of an interesting question.
Maybe that's one for the next book.
Yeah. I'd like to keep talking with that person.
Yeah. Well, I'll send you the Q&A. No, it was a very well-informed question. Well, I think we've come to the end. As I say, but on behalf of the ISPIM community and the 100 or so people that were here, I want to thank you very much for that illuminating insight that was so very helpful. And good luck with all your future books and endeavors.
Okay. Thank you all very much.
See you, Gina. Thanks a million.
Bye-bye. All right. Take care, Peter. Bye-bye.